good evening, whatever time it is. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I decided that I want to do a part two of my podcast about kind of the advice I want to give people in their 20s as a 30-year-old. Um, so, um, I'm just trying to think back to my 20s and kind of the lessons that I've learned. So, take the information as you wish. Um, there are certain key life lessons that I've learned. Um, I think one of the main ones that I maybe did not take too much consideration into is kind of investing in let's say the stock market, for example. So I had a part one of this video which has been released, has been out for a couple of weeks. So yeah, so firstly, let's just go back. Let's just go straight into it. Kind of investing into the stock market is very important. So the earlier you do that, the more you will compound, right? So that's another thing. I also believe that whatever money you do have, make sure you set aside a percentage for charity. Whether that's your time for charity or whether that's money for charity, make sure that you, um, even if it's a very small percentage, spend some voluntary time doing things outside of your work. It might be just one activity a month or whatever it is. Do that for society because unfortunately, cost of living is a real issue at the moment, and it's actually getting worse. Um, Everyone knows about this. So always set a certain amount of your money for charity, or your time, or both. I say ideally both, but if you're doing one of those things, then that's fine. I think that's okay. I think in our 20s we are also we're chasing things a lot, and I think a lot of people, even in their 30s and 40s and 50s, are also chasing things. My advice is don't chase, wealth, don't chase money, but really try and figure out for yourself. Search inside of your own soul and think, what is it that what is it that I'm good at on this earth? What skills do I have that maybe someone else doesn't have? And what is it that I'm very, am I eloquent? For example, myself, I don't think I think something I really want to work on is my public speaking. I don't have very good speaking skills. However, I know people who do have very good speaking skills, and that enables them to convey a message very well. So if you have certain deficiencies, I think at any age really, but I think specifically in your 20s, um, if they're major, then obviously make sure you fix them. If they're minor, then don't worry too much about them. But do try and address them as well as you can. But we're just humans at the end of the day. Some people have specific flaws and issues which aren't necessarily going to be resolved overnight. So whatever that is, then try and figure that out. Um, so yeah, obviously, as I just mentioned, the first thing I mentioned in this video is investing in yourself. Um, so including monetary, so invest maybe in some gold or in the stock market. I prefer the stock market because I feel like gold is more like you're buying gold and you're not using that money to really, when you invest in the stock market, you're investing in companies which ultimately employs people. Not only does it employ people, it also is used to upgrade a company's assets. You know, not assets is probably the wrong word. The money is used to for new technologies in the company, which maybe, for example, if it's a pharmaceutical company, it will be used to create drugs. To do research on medicines, clinical trials, etc. So that money is actually the money that you put into that, even if it's a tiny amount, £1,000 or £500, £100, whatever it is. That money is going to be used for the development of drugs, and literally, you could cure people in the future. And that kind of mentality, kind of trying to figure out why you're investing as well, is very important. Um, Another thing as well that I personally did not do when I was younger is I was afraid to ask for help for anything. And this was specifically outlined to me by some family members who I respect very much. I'm not going to go into details, but I was never I felt like I could never ask for help because I always felt like I had to figure everything out for myself, which isn't true because asking for help actually isn't a weakness. You'll be surprised. If there's something you're struggling with, you're really, really struggling with it, and it's affecting your mental health, physical health, speak to someone about it. Um, and they might be able to sort you out, and that's important. Um, I think in your 20s is when you kind of figure out what your strengths are. So whatever your strengths are, really try and double down on them. And if it's a strength in your career, for example, if you're very good at calculating things very quickly in your mind, and you're able to do complete tasks very quickly, then maybe you should, you know, yeah, maybe you're very mathematical, and maybe you want to change your career towards something that's very mathematical, such as software is very mathematical. Research into you know, quantum mechanics, and if you want to pursue those things, go into research, become a professor, whatever it is. These are kind of high end careers. But even if it's like a normal career, like you're good at building things, you have this real knack of understanding, how to create something that's going to last. In terms of building a house, you know, apprenticeships, things like that. Maybe pursue apprenticeship. That could also be very helpful to you, and then obviously that is your strength, and you can really capitalize that later on as you spend hours and hours and hours trying to like figure out this specific niche that you're really good at. You can really hone in on that and actually become really good in your field, and you can actually monetize that essentially, because we all need money to survive in this society, and it's getting more and more difficult, especially for people in their 20s, 30s, millennials, Gen Z. Everyone's struggling realistically. um, and also, well, I'll just go on to another thing. So this is almost like advice that I give myself 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Action is underrated. So sometimes we think, I mean, at least I used to think that, I've got to have this perfect plan in my head about what I'm going to do with my life. Maybe outside of my career, inside my career. But the reality is that no one has a perfect plan. Sometimes we might have health problems, we might have monetary problems, we might have relationship problems, whatever it is. We might have certain problems which we encounter day to day, and that kind of impacts your plans. And then my plan didn't work out, therefore I'm just going to do nothing. That is definitely not true. Just act, do something that is beneficial, even if it's not according to your original plan. As long as it's a step forward in the right direction. You feel, within your own intuition, you feel like one step in a specific direction is actually good for you. So that would be under, I've just written down here: plan your life, but be flexible. Make long-term plans. The long-term game is actually the best game. So don't think about, another thing to add on to this is, delayed gratification always wins at the end. So you don't need things instantly. Just take one step at a time. You have 365 days in a year. You have 80-ish years, hopefully, in your life. Um, so yeah, that's one thing to say. Um, so I think for myself, I'm naturally quite a creative person. However, I've chosen a path which isn't very creative. I am good at science, so I actually have chosen it to an extent. So I've always been relatively good at science, and that's I've been pretty good at, not amazing at, and I've become a pharmacist, right? So, and I work, within a community pharmacy setting where I speak to multiple different types of people every day. So, generally speaking, you get elderly people, you get middle-aged people, you get young people. Mainly, it's elderly people I deal with, but I do deal with other age groups as well. But it kind of forced me to kind of start talking more and being more sociable. Like, I think naturally I'm more sociable now than I used to be, especially 10, 15 years ago. I was a very introverted kid. Um, so I didn't really enjoy spending time with people. However, now I'm kind of borderline. So I like having my own time by myself, but I also like socializing to an extent. Um, so this is almost advice to myself, even now going on into my 30s, kind of be more creative. Um, So another thing, I think this is probably one of the most important things for you to realize is um, time on this earth is limited. Time on this earth is limited. You don't know how short your life is going to be. We all assume that we probably lived around 70, 80 years old, maybe 90 if we're lucky. Um, but the reality is we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. As depressing as that sounds, it is the reality. Therefore, it's important to realize. Um, therefore, I would say use your time to add benefit to society. What is it that you're doing in your day-to-day life that's benefiting society? For example, something I've done recently in the last couple of weeks is I've done a food donation within my community, and we've donated hundreds of pounds worth of food to a homeless shelter. We've done this before as well, so that's one thing that I've done, not to brag, but just to inspire other people to do whatever they can, whether it be little or big. You'll be surprised at how satisfied you will be if you undertake these tasks, if you undertake things which are charitable, if you undertake things which are beneficial to society, whatever they might be. It might be within your work as well. Let's say you work very long hours, you never really have much time outside of that. Maybe it means doing a very small thing for a work colleague that will brighten up their day. That doing those little small consistent acts of charity is so beneficial for you, and you'll feel it. You'll be like, okay, I feel fantastic for doing that. Yeah, this is something that is also advice to myself as a 30-year-old. I have this habit, unfortunately, of starting a book, and I'll read 70, 80 pages within a couple of days, and then I'll just leave the book, and I won't continue reading it, or I will continue reading it, but it takes me a long time to get back to it. I'll also read multiple books at the same time, and I might dip in and out of each book, and it might take me a couple of years to complete one book because I'm also reading about 3 or 4 different other books, and I'm not doing it very consistently. So I would say to myself, this advice to myself, and also people in their 20s, read more. But this is a very important fact that I liked, well, which I've observed anyway. You don't have to agree with all the ideas in a book, but it just gives you an idea about how someone else thinks. Um, what kind of information do they have that you don't have? So actually, this is why reading's so important. It's because it gives you information, and I'm talking about reading, not fiction books, but books which obviously you read fiction if that's what you like, but non-fiction books where things are very factual and not always factual, but it's also an interpretation of someone else's knowledge on life. Essentially, they've interpreted certain things, aspects, whether it be about economics, about psychology. Um, they've 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 obviously received some information from their surroundings, and they've interpreted it their own way. Realize when you don't agree with the ideas as well. That's fine. You can try and understand their ideas, but you don't have to agree with all their ideas. But take the good information from every book that you read. Take the information that you believe is true on your own reflection of things, and then everything will work out fine. But yeah, that's the end of my video. That's just kind of a part two. So I've got a new setup now. So I've got a phone stand. I've got a microphone. So hopefully there's some beneficial information that I've given you guys. For people in your 20s, feel free to comment, like, share this video if you like. I'm a very small YouTuber at the moment. If I stay that way, it's fine. But even if I reach 3 or 4 people and I've made their day a bit better, then I know my time has been worthwhile. But yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Please, obviously, feel free. If you have any criticisms, comments, anything else, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Thank you very much. Hello again, guys. I know I've ended the video. However, I've missed out kind of an important part which I wanted to include in this video. And what that is I've already talked about investing in the stock market, but this is even more important. Investing in your health. So your 20s is where, everyone has their own set of rules or whatever regarding this. However, in your 20s is a good time to start building habits. The most important habit, I would say, um, in terms of your longevity, hopefully, on this earth, and just your general well-being, is investing in your health. So I want, I kind of, I can't emphasize this enough. If you're in your 20s, you're eating junk food. It's fine. We do eat junk food every now and again, But if you're eating junk food continuously every day, by the time you get to your 30s or mid 30s, you're going to see a drastic decrease in your quality of life. You might be overweight, you might have, knee problems, you might be your body might be getting into metabolic diseases like diabetes. Cardiovascular disease is probably, well on its way in your mid 30s if you haven't looked after your health. So, as you all know, there are two ways that you can look after your health. Um, I would say probably the most important is exercise, regardless of your diet. If you're not exercising regularly, you might still live a good life, but most people will eventually get some sort of diseases. Even if you do look after your health, you're probably going to get some disease, or you might get a disease. Um, but you should be, exercising regularly. The NHS recommends 150 minutes of non-vigorous activity. That can include brisk walking. It can include low activities, low intensity sports, whatever they may be. If you're not into sports, obviously brisk walking is a good option. Or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise. So, running, lifting, a very heavy lifting session, I suppose. Don't go too heavy because you don't want to injure yourself, but progressive overload is important. If you can maintain your muscle mass as you get older, reduce your risk of falls by the time in your 80s and 90s. That's very important. So, what I personally do is I lift weights on a weekly basis. So, I have my own, workout regime. Even if it's an hour to an hour and a half a week of lifting weights, it's going to make a huge difference. Most likely to your health long term. And it's all about probability. I mean, some people they might look after their health and they may get diseases anyway, but it just minimizes your risk of getting diseases. You don't want the main thing is not to have you don't want to have metabolic diseases as you get older, because it's not going to be very good. Another thing that I do is I take supplements. So I take a multivitamin, I take omega 3s, I take vitamin D, all of those, and I even take turmeric as well because I had some knee problems earlier. So I take turmeric with black pepper as an anti-inflammatory, which is really good for joints. So I take those things on a daily basis, just because I'm in the healthcare field, and if I'm not practicing what I preach, then I'm not being a very good healthcare practitioner essentially, as a pharmacist. So that's what I do on my day-to-day basis. Or I might not exercise every day. I probably on average I've done about 10 to 15 kilometers of jogging the last few years, every week. So I do that. I lift weights, but it hasn't been. I'm still not. I'm still trying to work on my consistency. So weights, I'm probably lifting weights most of the time in the last few years. I'm not a huge guy. I'm not an absolutely massive guy. That's not my aim. I think now my main aim is just pure health, and you know it gives you a lot of things to be grateful for if you have your health. So just really regard that. That was the last thing I wanted to say in this video. If you have any queries about anything, feel free to send me a private message, or if you want to be more public about it, feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to like, subscribe, share this video. I'm just learning how to do YouTube videos, so I'm not particularly great at the moment. Obviously, everyone's got their own style, but my style hasn't yet been. I haven't quite formulated my style of video. But my main aim of this channel is to provide useful information for the public, for public consumption that will benefit their life. It's not going to be something that's going to waste away your life. So rest assured, if that's what you believe in, then please feel free to subscribe to this video, to this YouTube channel, and like this video. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, guys. Bye bye.